Well, it said on here, it said XFL just tweeted out new year, new hat. I already have one of these new XFL hats. Just throwing that out there. Just throwing that out. I don't even think this one is available yet, but happy 2023, everyone. We'll set the stage. And then I do just have a little bit of a tale before we get into this. We have John Vogel joining us here. John was with us for the QB selection show and then the XFL draft, part of our mammoth 8-hour day. John was a good portion of that. We have Evan Willsmore here as well, hopping on XFL News Hub. Evan also part of the XFL draft that day. John, are you having a good 2023? And we'll talk to Evan. And how are you guys doing?
Yeah, man. I think so far we're looking great. NFL draft season is like fully upon us. We just had some big giant people declare for that this year. Bryce Young and Will Anderson Jr. and Jahmyr Gibbs, all probably top 90 picks. So, just trying to keep up with all that has been pretty crazy. But outside of that, yeah, good. Really good.
There we go. And yeah, there was some debate. Well, first off, Evan, how are you doing? And then I'm too excited to get into my tale here. Evan, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Kicked off the new year with a bang. Was up in LA for the Chargers game yesterday, so I've been keeping busy. But yeah, excited to look into all this, XFL draft stuff as if we didn't already have an 8-hour draft stream a couple months ago. But hey, I'm ready to do something similar. So
yeah, I don't, hopefully not 8 hours today. That'll be good. Yeah, I have lunch with my mother coming up here a little bit. There was some debate whether, do we do it yesterday? Like, do we do it on Sunday? I said, I don't. It was my mother-in-law's birthday. We were gonna go do that, and then I was in depression from my Commanders got eliminated from the playoffs. So I was about a carafe of mimosa and 2 Rainiers deep when they tweet out this, hey, the supplemental draft. So just anyone listening, if you want like a sight of what Reed's life looks like as an alt football podcaster, waiting in line at the bathroom at the bar, I've got the Google sheet like on my phone, trying to screenshot, crop, send it out. But I do feel like, Ryan Woods left us this week, from the USFL, President Football Ops. Spring League was famous for sending out their box scores via Google Doc, Google Sheets, whatever, after the game. And so I feel like we're letting Brian's legacy live on here. We have the XFL supplemental draft shared via Google Sheet. John, initial thoughts, and then we'll get into all this. Initial thoughts on the supplemental draft, the names that came out yesterday.
Okay, so initial thoughts, there's a bunch of them, and we obviously knew that this was going to be a really heavy draft into guys whose contracts were expiring with the USFL. And so we knew that was the whole reason really that they were having this. But to see the sheer number of people that did it, that have made the jump, I think it's going to take a big hit. It's going to be a big hit to the USFL. And then the other thing, too, is there's a few names that were really unexpected, both young and old, that I can't wait to talk about here so at some point of the show.
Yeah, I think it's 35 players, USFL guys yesterday with a supplemental. Evan, I know that Andrew, Andy Murray over at USFL News Hub put together one of the lists for that. And then I know Pat has a list here we can go through as well. Initial thoughts from you, Evan, everything from the supplemental.
Yeah, well, I think the one thing that was really surprising to me was the number of USFL people. Obviously, we knew what they were doing with, sort of that December 31st deadline and having the supplemental literally the day after that, first day of the new year. But yeah, it was a striking number of USFL guys, and not just any USFL guys. I mean, some of the names on that list, like Donald Payne, Will Likely, just off the top of my head, those guys were some of the top producing players in the USFL. So that was definitely a surprise to see that many names. But then again, there's a couple of other, like John said, old names, new names that stood out. I think Josh Gordon to many people was the sort of, big ticket. That one stood out a lot. But yeah, overall, I'd say it was a pretty good draft. Lots of solid players, lots of things that I can talk about, which is always good. So yeah, that was good.
Yeah, interesting. I guess first off, just to lead, and I know he's probably watching as well. All of our friend, the news came out first before everything else. Brian Scott, long time presumed going to the Vipers. I told Brian, I don't want to know what team you're going to because sometimes I forget when I talk on here for 8 hours for XFL draft. Like, I don't know, like, what do I know? What do I like? What is canon here in the world? So congratulations for that. What do you think, John? And then we'll get Evan's thoughts as well. Brian to the Vegas Vipers, presumably battling with Luis Perez over there, right?
Yeah, Perez is the quarterback that's over there. And I mean, if we're talking about a skill standpoint, I don't think there's too much of a contest. And, it's because Perez, as efficient as he's been at some places and some, in some games that he's played in minor league football, he's limited with his arm talent. And that's I think that's the big knock that's kept him from playing in the NFL, is just the fact that you got a guy that he can probably throw it effectively about 30 yards. And I don't think he gets it past that very well. But yeah, Brian, he brings a good bit more arm strength. He brings more mobility. He brings just more playmaking ability. This is the guy he was going to run away and win the MVP if he stayed healthy last year in USFL. And I think it was very clear after the first day of the draft that they were going to go get him, because there was a spot literally just sitting there on the roster waiting for him, and I think that after we did the quarterback stream and everything, to be honest, I was sitting here trying to figure out, where's Brian going? Where is it going? And it was Vegas pretty clearly.
Evan, you obviously tracked Brian Scott through all the different things. What did you make? And are you happy to see him finally have a home here in the XFL? Long time coming.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I told him. Brian's a great guy, and he's always kind of had that underdog mentality, right? Played at Occidental College, Division III, just up here in LA. Great dude. You hear mixed reviews about him, in terms of just actual, I guess, skill. As John pointed out, there's the arm talent thing. I personally really like what I saw a lot in the USFL when he was with the Stars. I mean, yeah, clear league MVP up until he got hurt and he was replaced by Case Cookus. But I think there's a lot of upside there, and he definitely pushes Perez for that starting job, I think, just given, what we saw in the USFL a couple months ago.
Did you guys like on here when I just did note when they put this out, Brian Scott played at Occidental College. He worked out for the Chiefs, the Colts, tried out rookie camps for the Chiefs and the Falcons. No mention of, the spring league, the USFL, because even when Sloter came in, didn't they say he played it? Or am I see again, what do I know? What do I not know? Did we talk about Sloter and Perez's USFL legacies when they came in? John?
I don't remember. I did think that was odd. And, because that's a good point that you can bring up. If you really want to hype this guy as a guy that's, he's a potential star in this league. And that's why, he gets his own press release involving what team he's going to. But, because not only did he play in those other leagues, he's a 2-time spring league MVP. He won it in 2018. He outplayed Manziel down there the first year that they did it. See, there you go. There it is. And in 2020, when the spring league had their season there at the end of 2020, it kind of went under the radar. Not a lot of people knew. Or 2019, I think that's when it was. Whenever COVID was. That was 2020.
Yeah, November 2020. That was probably the highlight of my podcast career, was highlighting Jousters and the Hughes or the Aviators playing at the San Antonio. That was wild times.
Yeah, wild episode there. But it's that's the thing is, he's a 2-time MVP in the spring league, and that felt like something you could kind of bring up, and maybe that was a shot at the USFL, to not mention it and just to make it more irrelevant, is we're just going to ignore that they exist now because we're going to overtake them, and their impending doom is coming upon them. I'm not trying to spout anti-USFL stuff here, but with, like you mentioned, with Brian Woods leaving and making that announcement, I thought that was kind of that foreshadows, that tells a lot about the state of the league, but we'll see, I guess.
Yeah, we have a couple comments here. So hopefully, let me remove this. We can show. XFL bias is crazy already. We're on the XFL supplemental draft live stream. Jared is overwhelmed with that. Thorin says Bob Stoops did mention Sloter and Canelo being together in the USFL, but that's sometimes it's different if you have a coach saying something versus the league. Yeah, nope, they didn't talk about it. Stoops brought up Sloter. Harrison says on here, and this is going to be my next question for Evan here. Officially going to be amazing. I wonder why Teamu wasn't assigned yesterday. Evan, were you surprised? And I have not heard any reason, maybe contractually or otherwise, or maybe disinterest now. Any thoughts on Teamu not showing up?
Yeah, I was surprised, and I was mainly surprised because they assigned Brian Scott, who's another USFL guy, and they left out Te'amu. And obviously, again, we don't need to say it, but Te'amu back in 2020 was one of the big names in the XFL up there with PJ Walker and everybody else, right? So I was definitely a bit surprised, but I think maybe the best and most logical reason to explain that would be an assignment. Maybe they don't know where he's going to go yet, so they're just delaying the announcement because it's been known, like with Brian, we all kind of knew he was going to Vegas just based on what we were hearing and what we were seeing. So again, like that wasn't too much of a surprise, but there hasn't been a real confirmed landing spot for Te'amu yet. There was some rumors I think about Arlington and some about going back to St. Louis, which I don't know if that's real or not, or if it's just fan hype. The most recent one I saw was DC. Again, whether that's accurate or not, I can't say. I don't have that information, but I would imagine he gets assigned some point in the next coming weeks, hopefully sometime around the schedule release, which I've been waiting on for a while now too. So yeah.
If you want Reed's conspiracy theory on here, so look at, we see the supplemental draft, right? This is like definitely XFL announces Brian Scott and whoever, and then we have Jordan Te'amu's bio right here. Just if you want my meta conspiracy theory, it does feel weird that we didn't have, but I am glad. I thought that Brian, I like building up the quarterbacks because that was the question, right? Like, is this just going to be in the draft? Is this going to be anything else? John, any thoughts on Te'amu? And then we can get into some of this other USFL and XFL stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just what we've heard is there's a really good chance he's not going to play in the XFL, which is crazy. I was thinking Orlando made the most sense. I had heard he wanted to stay in Florida. That was part of the reason why he was supposed to be going to the XFL, was because the Florida franchise in the USFL has moved to Memphis. The Viper. No, it's not the Vipers over there. It's
the Bandits moved, and now
Bandits,
the Showboats.
That's it. Yeah, man, I can always same colors. Okay,
yeah.
But no, Tampa Bay moving to Vegas to be the Showboat. Memphis to be the Showboats was supposed to be the reason why he was dropping out, and it just makes you wonder if maybe Jordan's at the point now where he's moving past football.
Max here, producer. I'm keep debating. I don't know if I want to call it Max, producer Max now, or researcher Max. It was listener Max for a long time. But assuming DC for that, we have a question coming up about the Orlando quarterback room because that is a little bit scary. Yeah, you wonder that. I mean, you even saw Kurt. That Kurt was rumored to come, and Heineke. I can never say his last name, and tweeted, I think on TikTok, like, hey, I just didn't want to be away from my, girlfriend or fiance or whatever for another 4 months. And it's a really long NFL season. I think you just get to a point where you kind of age out. Evan, any other thoughts on that? And we can start cracking on this list.
If you're talking about Kurt Benkert, on the topic of sort of, well, I guess quarterbacks, going to one league or another, just fading out entirely. I mean, you do realize, and especially I realize with the Kurt thing, because I'm doing a lot of this stuff with Houston, it is a very personal thing, right? And I sit here and I talk about, we all talk about Jordan Te'amu. Hey, maybe he's going here or here, wherever, right? Well, maybe he's not going anywhere. Maybe like John said, maybe he is kind of just ready to walk away. And, he's done really every league now, except for, well, I guess CFL. But, he's had a great career, and it wouldn't be entirely out of the question to call it quits now, and if that's the way it is, well, congratulations to him. And, it was fun watching him over all the years, and, he's had a couple NFL stops, but it does take a toll on you, right? You're bouncing all over the place. You don't really latch on anywhere. You're kind of a camp guy, practice squad guy. Maybe you're even there for a week, like what's his name was Derek King with the Panthers, right? So nothing's really permanent in the NFL. You find careers are only getting shorter, and it's just one of those things you have to realize that even though the XFL and the USFL and all these leagues are an option for some guys, it doesn't mean they're just going to take that immediately if they have the chance, because you have all these other factors in their personal lives playing into that.
We have a comment here, and I've seen this also posted a lot online. How many of these guys are actually going to sign? Because we've had a couple guys XFL get drafted and then they sign back with the USFL. Players are reporting in 2 days. I don't, in my gut, feel like we're signing players this week. We're drafting them, presuming they're not showing up. I mean, John, any thoughts of that? Like, this is game time. Like, if you're being drafted here in the supplemental draft, we know exactly how many roster spots we have at this point, who we want. I mean, do you see a non more than 5 guys, what over under here of like actually not showing up?
To me, it seems like at this point, at the beginning of the draft, when we had our first draft and we had our first whatever supplemental rounds, all that, those first 3 days, it seemed if we're talking about guys off of that roster, there's probably a few here and there. They're scattered throughout. But like you said, this is 2 days before, guys report, or 3 days they're holding this draft before. If they don't think the guy's going to come to camp, then I don't think you're spending a roster spot on them right now, because, these are it's getting to crunch time. This is really important stuff. And you just, as a general manager in general, you don't want to, be holding spots for somebody that's not going to show up. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing here. And as you build your team, as you get everything put together, now I think pretty much there might be one or two that might fall out just because of a family emergency or whatever that might come up. But I think for the most part, everybody on this list should be reporting.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, crap happens, things in life comes up, or you get a call. I mean, maybe, like I said, maybe you get a call from the, whoever USFL coach is calling, and hey, we really want you back, or whatever, all this stuff. I just, this just seems to be in this, like, obviously all this divisiveness and the XFL and the USFL, but that's like the big thing I've seen now is like, well, they haven't signed yet. Like, if I go work a job and I get paid, $1,000, and they go, hey, we're going to pay you in 2 weeks. It's like, you kind of made that money. It's not, well, okay, I'm not really, like, well, once the check, like, they're drafted, like, they're going. It seems like this like last, like, straw that we're holding on to. Like, well, until I get a notarized fax sent to me from Brian Scott that says that he is on the Vipers and he is there in Arlington. I mean, Evan, what do you make of this?
I mean, yeah, I would expect all these guys to report to camp too. Again, every now and then something happens. It's just out of control, out of anyone's control, right? But it's a good list of names. So I certainly hope that everyone on this list and on the previous lists that we've looked at of everyone that's been picked, does make it, because, this is a great opportunity, right? And I mean, I feel like I don't need to say that a million times either, but, and again, I'm not going to sit here and we're not going to get into, which is better, XFL, USFL. Like, I'm not trying to, stir everybody up, but I would say, like, yeah, this is a really good opportunity for people. And, if you're going to pass this up for whatever reason to go sign, an NFL futures deal, if it's available for you, or whatever else, I mean, do what you feel is right. But personally, I think this is where the money's at.
I did see, I had a couple of people actually tweeted me and they said, and then we'll get into John's scouting thoughts here. Hey, how come all these teams didn't draft picks or whatever? Not every team had the equal number of picks. Some people passed on them back in the original one. Like, it wasn't, not every team went into the supplemental draft. Like, we all have 15 spots or whatever we need to fill. So, John, any big, I mean, obviously, like, the Josh Gordon's, like, the big one, like, Ben DiNucci throwing to Josh Gordon at Lumen Field is a wild situation, but thoughts, any big names that stood out from you coming out here? A lot of offensive linemen kind of off the board here, in the first round. Kind of major thoughts from you.
I think just to touch on Josh Gordon quickly is because that's the most exciting name on this list, right? We all remember Josh. In fact, my daughter was going through a box of old cards last night. We were sitting there watching the game. She pulled up a box of some of my old cards, pulled out 2 Josh Gordons. And I went, oh man, he just got picked today. That's crazy, But so no, I think that the XFL wins if we let him smoke a blunt after scoring a touchdown, 1,000%, and don't kick him out for doing so. Anyways, I just had to get that out after the fan control football guy.
Question: How did Josh do? Because Josh was in season 1 FCF, right? He was in the original 4. Evan, like, how did he do in that? Were we happy with Josh Gordon and Johnny Manziel? Right, they were on the Zappers. Is my memory serving me?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll be honest. I wasn't watching a ton of FCF stuff. I was kind of just going off what I was hearing from everyone who's more tied in with it. But it was enough to get him a contract with the Chiefs, and he did score a touchdown in the NFL last year. Didn't have many catches, but, like, he was around. He actually made an impact. He wasn't just sitting there on the practice squad. And I think a lot of people forgot he was with the Titans this year too. Briefly. Again, he didn't actually play, but he still has NFL interest. And personally, I think, every time I think his NFL career is done, it's not. And I would like to say it's done now, right? I think the XFL, like, maybe this is kind of like the kind of icing on the cake to his career. He can finally do something up there in Seattle. He was with the Seahawks before at a time. But I really hope that he can kind of do this and then maybe ride off into the sunset, because again, it's great if everyone can get to the NFL, right? But, Josh Gordon, it's safe to say he has a bit of a history, bit of a track record. And, I'm not saying that I don't want to see him in the NFL again, but I just don't think it's maybe worth his time at this point, if that makes sense. So I think the XFL again is a great opportunity for him. He's going to get more playing time, going to be a top option, and wish him the best at the end of the day.
Is this a gimmick signing, John?
No,
you don't think so? Okay,
no.
I'm not asking with an answer in my head.
Because Seattle is right. So Seattle's general manager is Randy Mueller, and Randy's a very football heavy guy. He's very smart. He's very calculated. He knows what he's looking for. Gordon fits exactly what they want to do, which is going to be a lot of heavy play action, running those deep crossers. That's why the Titans gave him a chance this year too, because that's exactly what they like to do is the play action, heavy crossers. Josh is great. When he's on like a one cut 90-degree angle route, he is awesome. He's still got good speed. He's still holding up really well athletically. He's what now, 35, something like that. It's a veteran signing. He's a guy that can bring some, mentorship to some of the younger receivers and teach them a thing or two. But a guy who's also going to I think he's still going to play at a good level. And but exactly what they want.
Evan, names stood out to you seeing this yesterday, you kind of as they send everything out, and now that we've had, I know that you guys are getting the articles together for news. Have any names standing out, processing? You're the Houston team, right, that you're focusing on?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to start with Houston guys, well, the name I brought up before, and I've got a list here that we can go through, but the name that I brought up before was Will Likely, because he was with the Gamblers this year in the USFL, and now he's just kind of, I guess, I don't know what the term is, like hopping across the pond, one league to another, but same city. Anyway, he had like, I think 4 interceptions or something like that. I mean, he was all over the place, right? He can return kicks, return punts. He's a great corner, kind of the do-it-all guy. And, we'll see where he kind of fits in. I'm not entirely sure. We'll just kind of see, what happens through camp, the developments there to see what his role is really going to be. But either way, I'm excited to have him on board. He was a really fun guy to watch in the USFL, a name that was always popping up on my phone. Will Likely does this, Will Likely does that, tackle, pick, pass breakup, whatever it is, kick return. Anyway, that's a guy I'm definitely excited to see. One of the many, again, polls from the USFL that the XFL has now.
Someone's up for quite the feat here, right? Between his coaching staff and his players here. And then I saw something that he was being rumored for some other head coaching job. I mean, Kevin Sumlin has quite the job here, right? With the Gamblers heading into, I guess, April or March, whatever here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now this is not Max is being mean. I'm sure we'll enjoy playing in Houston for real this time. I don't know. I don't know if that's appreciated. The thing that stands out to me here, John, tons of O-line coming off the top first 2 rounds here. A lot of guys from the USFL. I think we had a note here that many of them were all USFL. There was 15 O-line taken, 13 to 15 starters. 4 were all USFL plus 2 midseason, all USFL plus 1 midseason honorable mention. We had Eric Alcoan back whenever the hell it was, pre-USFL last year talking. That is one of the sticking points, quarterback, O-line. We've talked about that in the XFL draft. Thought seeing another 15 guys from the USFL taken from the offensive line group.
Oh, yeah, no, this was coming. And it's because, right now, specifically across football in general, there's a shortage of good offensive tackles. And it's because it's such a difficult position to play now. You've got edge rushers starting to come in all shapes and sizes. And so your typical, 6'5", 300-pound offensive tackle that's already very difficult to find it can get mismatched when they're going up against a 5'10", 5'11", 240, 250 edge rusher, because you're creating a size misadvantage, that forces him to get lower than he's comfortable getting coming around the edge. That's one of the things that we're seeing. A lot of these edge rushers that have done well in these alt leagues are smaller and they don't translate to the NFL as well, because that's what you're doing. You're making a 6'7", 6'8" tackle that gets rejected from the NFL because he can't get down low enough to block somebody. You're creating that same mismatch advantage with the size with a smaller edge rusher. But so you got a shortage of good tackles, and everybody's kind of still freaking out about that. It's across all football, NFL, CFL, XFL, and now the USFL is in a real, heap because they just got robbed of pretty much everybody else that they could have had to block their quarterbacks. And so, anyways, so the thing is, this was a long time coming. This was no surprise at all. I knew it was going to be heavy offensive lineup off the top from the get go because people are really worried about protecting their quarterbacks and having suitable guys. I had a few guys reach out to me asking if I knew any guys in college that would be interested in going straight XFL instead of, trying to go the NFL draft route or even the transfer portal. Like, hey, the people in the transfer portal that can come play here now. So they're looking at all different options. They're really trying to put this together. We saw it last year. That's why to get back to Brian Scott, not to keep tooting his horn or anything, but it's like, that's why he got hurt, was because he didn't have good enough. He was constantly running those 3 games for his life, and he took so many hits. That's why the quarterbacks really struggled to stay healthy last year in the USFL. The XFL is trying to avoid that here too. So it's a problem. It's a major problem.
Well, even this morning, I was watching my NFL stuff, and they were blaming the Vikings, defeat yesterday. Like, well, Kirk Cousins, had his 3rd center or whatever, and all these injuries. I mean, it's a problem even, here, the 12-4, whatever Vikings here heading in, let alone the St. Louis Bell
they were
Hawks.
down to their 3rd string center yesterday, I think, if I remember correctly. But here's the other thing too to consider with offensive line. So did you know that 5% of the world population is over 6'2", 200 pounds? So imagine how difficult it is to find a guy that's 6'5", 300 pounds. And so when I was at the Combine last year, I was talking with Pittsburgh Steelers scout Mark Gorsak. And, he's a longtime veteran Steelers guy, knows a lot about football, and probably one of my best friends in the industry, a guy that I can text and just kind of chat ball with and just general stuff. And one of the things he made this point to me because Cam Hayward walked up to us when we were standing there. His brother was at the Combine last year, Connor, out of Michigan State. He's a fullback. He's now with the Steelers as well. But he made this point to me. He said, yeah, you see this guy right here? This is why we look for these people that are this massive size, because they are literally 1 in 1,000. There are not many people that are like them, that are built like this. And so when you've got a guy that's 6'4", 6'3", 6'2", 300 plus pounds, and he can move, that's gold. And that's why they went heavy offensive line. They were going to rob anybody that could play in the XFL potentially at that position group.
Evan, thoughts on this conversation?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I've said it before on the show, and even if I haven't, the first thing that I always tell people who aren't really familiar with, football in general, but specifically draft process and things like that, offensive line is one of the, very overlooked positions, right? And it's hard to find guys that are, however many pounds or, however tall they are. But I think the most important thing is, their ability to, because you can find, big guys, but again, to me, it's about movement. And, specifically, I think the most valuable position on an offensive line is left tackle. Both tackles specifically, I think are important, right, over guard or center. Again, they're all important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to, take one from the other, whatever. But I think left tackle, I've read and I've heard that left tackle is the most important because it's typically the quarterback's blind side. So you look at guys in the NFL like, Teron Armstead, he got paid a ton of money. And a lot of people were saying, oh, well, he has an injury history and he's a Pro Bowler when he's good, but is he really that good? I'm like, look, man, if you can find a guy that size who, can move like that on the left side, at the furthest edge, you should be paying him a ton of money, even if he isn't, maybe viewed as elite or, does have an injury history. I mean, to me, a guy like Teron Armstead is, John was talking about finding big guys like that are gold. Teron Armstead is like a platinum, and it's going to be, I don't think the XFL or the USFL will ever get a Teron Armstead. And if they do, they should be incredibly fortunate. You're going to have guys that they might combine similar traits and skill sets or whatever, but there's always going to be something lacking. I mean, if you can get even close to that, then I think you've done a good job. So offensive lineman, yes, it's a very hard position to evaluate. And even I struggle with it sometimes because you only have so much to go off of. A lot of what you're looking at is pressures given up and, sacks given up or whatever. So it's kind of some different stats as opposed to other positions. But at the end of the day, yes, you need a lot of offensive linemen. And even if they're not the most refined, or even if they don't look exactly like a true athlete, don't write them off because these guys, a lot of them can play, and again, so it's going to be hard for some of them. It's a very difficult position, but these leagues are trying their best to find that, because like John said, if only 5% of the world population is above 6'2" and 200 pounds, it's going to be difficult to find someone that's 6'4", 300 pounds.
In my college drinking days, I probably had that enough weight for that. I don't know if I have the athletic skill for that, but I probably had the John, we did the breakdown, and we had the XFL draft, and leaving all these spots. Teams you were surprised, had needs that didn't take, or took that didn't have kind of, besides the offensive line. Obviously, we had the Brian Scott, but some of these other top names off the board here.
Okay, so obviously Eli Rogers is a nice addition for Orlando. They're really trying to pad their receiver group, and I think it's because the quarterback position, we discussed it, is seriously lacking over there. If I'm an Orlando fan right now, or I'm even in the front office of Orlando, I'm a little bit worried about my roster, and it's because of the quarterback. So much is predicated on it, right? The ball goes through their hands every single play, and I understand DeAndre Francois. Players like playing with him. He's looked good at times, especially when he was at Florida State years ago. Ended up getting himself into trouble. Ended up at Hampton. Didn't play very well in the spring league a couple of years ago as well. But so I understand all that. Now the guy that's also on the roster with him, Dormady, is probably a liability. You got him pulled up there. He's listed as Central Michigan, but he was at Tennessee before he transferred there. School I'm very familiar with. Grew up watching, big giant Vol fan. We hated him. He really struggled at the SEC level. And then Mitch Kidd is the kid that just came in, pun intended. Kidd is the guy that just came out of Fan Control Football, and he might end up playing a lot, because of the quarterback situation here. So obviously when this position is struggling, you want to pad the support positions as much as you possibly can. I think that's why they went with Eli Rogers early, which made sense. In other terms, I'm glad that you mentioned Will Likely, because that is a good addition for them. Reggie Northrup, who I thought was interesting, going to DC. He obviously played well in the USFL. You get down into about the fourth round. Another name that popped at me is a guy that I've liked. He's probably not going to play in the NFL, but he's done a really good job across all of the different spring leagues, is John Yarbrough. Yarbrough out of Richmond. He's just had a really solid, career in the lower levels. Sharif Miller, I think he was in the USFL last year, wasn't he? I can't remember. Was it Michigan that he was playing for?
I think so. It rings a bell, yeah.
Sharif Miller was a draft pick by the Philadelphia Eagles out of Penn State. He's, a tools guy that just hasn't been able to develop properly. That's really interesting. I like that. George Moore, right after him there at Oregon, great offensive tackle, great size. He should play really well at this level. I'm surprised that he kind of went down there. He has issues, I think with some of the okay, yeah, good. You got him there. He was with the
Breakers here.
With the break. Oh, that's right. Yeah, he was part of that.
That's okay. Right. That's okay. I wasn't trying to fact check.
No.
I have a list here.
I appreciate that. No, because I thought he was there and I couldn't remember. I was thinking. I guess I was forgetting who I'm getting it mixed up with. But now that I see the Breakers, yeah, that's 100% accurate. But yeah, George Moore, he's a young guy. He's got some room to develop. That's what they're going to kind of bet on there. Hakeem Butler. I know I'm rambling at this point. I'm sorry. There's so many guys. Hakeem Butler to St. Louis might have to kind of transition into a big slot, maybe a hybrid tight end, because he's just a big guy. A few years ago, it's a true story. So one of my friends in the industry, Thor Nystrom, shout out to Thor. He's over at Fantasy Pros, does a great job. We loved this guy. We just thought that he was coming out of Iowa State, 6'5", 220, contested ball freak, basically. And we just thought that he was going to kill it, and he's not been able to stick around the NFL. He just has not been able to find a role for him, so that's sucked for him. But he's probably going to end up transitioning into a big slot tight end type role, so he's interesting. Francis Bernard is a guy I really liked going to DC, another linebacker at DC. Francis Bernard played at the Senior Bowl in 2020, was one of my favorite guys when he went down there, came out of Utah. Really just he's kind of undersized, but he can play that half field that you want. So everybody right now is kind of playing You got the box. You split the box in half, and you essentially have two guys playing the mic. So one's playing one side of the box, one's playing the other. And so he fits that role perfectly. He's not that great in coverage, and I think that's probably why he's not in the NFL. I'll go ahead and take a break here so that we can let Evan do some talking, because I'll just keep going.
You're good, Evan. Yeah, when we were, and I tweeted out, we were watching the Seahawks yesterday, kind of in the aftermath of all this stuff. What were some of the big names we were talking about in the group chat? I haven't had a chance to go back and look at all that. People standing out for you?
Yeah, well, I'll just go through my list here.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll pick up, with Hakeem Butler, because that was a guy that really stood out to me too. It's interesting, my kind of pro comp for him was Mike Evans, and I always say that Mike Evans, if he put on about 20 pounds, he would be a tight end. Mind you, a really good tight end at that. And it's interesting because the Eagles actually signed Hakeem Butler in 2020 and tried moving him to tight end. I don't believe that he played a ton, but I would not be surprised at all if, he kind of fits into that big slot role in the XFL, or they do officially move him over to tight end. He was a guy I was really excited about as well, but he got injured. He was a 4th-round draft pick, so decently high. Got injured with Arizona his rookie year with a broken hand, never played. Then they cut him, and he kind of bounced around after that. Never found a home, but to me, he's kind of like the perfect alt league candidate because he has a lot of NFL traits and abilities, but he just hasn't really been able to put it all together. And I think the XFL can definitely help him with that. It also helps that he's going to St. Louis, where the head coach is Anthony Becht, who is a former NFL tight end himself. So that can probably make the transition a lot easier, I imagine. Going through the list here. Let's see. Next guy I'll talk about is Darius Clark, running back from Newberry. He's down there, went to Orlando. He was a guy who came out to one of the hub camps. And mind you, I wasn't at this camp. This was before I got in contact with all those guys, but shout out to them. They do great work. Anyway, he was at one of these hub camps, and I believe one of the Panthers scouts was there, and he was referred to the Panthers director of pro personnel, and they ended up signing him, Darius, to a contract. So he was with the Panthers for a bit. Not sure what happened to him after that. I think he actually might have had a stint with the BC Lions, but that's just going off the top of my head. And let's see, going down the list still. Aaron Dilworth is another interesting name. I don't know where he is on that list. Oh, he's a bit further up. He went to Orlando too. So he came out of a Division II school, Texas A&M Kingsville. Didn't really know anything about him in college, to be entirely honest, but he was there, and then I think he signed with the Edmonton Elks up in the CFL. Don't think he made it through camp. Most recent news I've heard of him was he was with the Bay Area Panthers in the Indoor Football League. Actually, Sam, that we work with, he did an interview with him that I believe is up on our site or his site. So shout out to Sam there. Let's see, a couple more. Guy we should talk about too, another receiver, is Jordan Vesey. Now, I don't know where he is on that list. He's somewhere down there. I forget which team he went to because I'm looking through my notes here, and I didn't put which team all these guys went to. But anyway,
Jordan Vesey went to Seattle from California here.
Okay, yeah, right. Dragons. Okay, yep. He went to Cal. The interesting part about him was so he's a guy I've had my eyes on for a while. Pretty good size and everything, but mainly because he got some traction back in, I think it was 2019 or 2020. Colin Kaepernick had a workout. And Jordan Vesey was there, and I guess they had a scout from Washington there, whatever the case may be. And he actually got signed to, at the time, the Washington football team, now the Commanders, the practice squad. And ever since then, he's done a bit of bouncing around. He was, I believe, with the Raiders this year in their camp. And he's kind of a guy I've always had my eyes on just because I heard about him through that story. And ever since then, I've kind of had an eye on him because of the alt league stuff. I figured he'd be a good fit for that. I got a couple more guys here. Hopefully I'm not rambling.
You're good. You're good.
But, all right. I've got, let's see. Deon Yelder. That's the guy that I wanted to talk about. A bit small for a tight end. So it's kind of the opposite of Hakeem Butler, where he might be a receiver or at least a big slot. Nowadays there's so many guys that are just big slot receivers, whether they're a receiver or a tight end. It doesn't really matter as much anymore. Deon Yelder, he won a Super Bowl with the Chiefs in 2019, bounced around a bit. He was with the Bucs at one point. Again, came out of Western Kentucky. I think he was undrafted, but I'm excited for him. He has a couple NFL catches to his name. So he's actually played, wasn't just a practice squad guy, camp body, whatever you want to call it. Going through here still, Darius Bradwell. running back from Tulane. Obviously, Tulane has a really good running back now, Tajay Spears, who's probably going to go on and have a good NFL career. But Darius Bradwell, I found out about him through Hard Knocks, of all places. He was with the Chargers in 2020 when they filmed Hard Knocks, and he was one of the guys that they sort of concentrated on. I've had a couple exchanges with him. He's a pretty nice guy, so excited for him. Not much else there, but I'll do two more here. Let's see. These are toward the end of the list. This guy, Ben, I don't want to butcher his name. Ben Bees. Hopefully I'm not.
BC, you going to Seattle?
Let's see. Yeah, he's a tight end, or fullback, I should say. Going to the Dragons. So he had a cool story. He was coming out of a D3 program, Wisconsin River Falls, I think, and he got some traction. I'm not sure if he went to one of the All-Star games. I can't verify that. I wasn't totally in touch with that. And there's so many names you lose track, right? But he was a guy coming out of D3, got a lot of interest, went to Buccaneers camp as a tight end officially. So it's good to see his name on there. Now they have him listed as a fullback, which I've kind of always looked at him as a fullback, just given the size. Again, tight end, fullback, one of those more hybrid positions in the NFL nowadays because most teams don't want a true fullback depending on the type of offense they run. And then the last guy, which is another sort of cool story, feel good, whatever, is Marcus Santos Silva. Now, he's one of those guys where he played basketball in college. He played at VCU and ended up transferring to Texas Tech, I think. And, there's been a couple of tight ends in the NFL. Most notable one off the top of my head I can think is Darren Fells, who, had a basketball career prior to playing in the NFL. And most of them, if not all, are tight ends. So this guy, Marcus Santos Silva, played at VCU, played at Texas Tech on their basketball team, then was with, I believe it was the Cleveland Browns in their camp this year. And now he's in the XFL, so good for him. There's a couple of other guys that I knew kind of took that route, played college basketball. One of them, I forget the guy's name, but he played at Baylor and then went to the Chiefs, and he I think won the championship with Baylor, whatever year that was. Anyway, so yeah, that kind of, I think, is everyone on my list here to talk about. There's a couple of other guys like Tomasi Lalile, I think is how you say his name. I've seen him at one of the hub camps too. He's been with a couple NFL teams. I point him out because he was with the Dallas Renegades in 2020, and now he's going back to the, I guess, new and refurbished Arlington Renegades. And then, I think that's it. I think that's it for me. That was a lot, so sorry.
You're good. No, that's Evan. We have you on to share your experience. I have a question for both of you. We start with John and then go to Evan. Reggie Corbin here. I got highlighted number 86 pick in the draft here. Big time USFL running back. Goes. And obviously, probably couldn't go in the first draft. Supplemental pick 86 here. Too low on Reggie Corbin.
No, I think the problem with Reggie is he's a role guy. All right, so he was great at Illinois for what they wanted, for what they needed. And, I mean, if you look at Illinois even right now too, they still like a rotation. They're using Chase Brown, and then they had I think he's a sophomore this year. I forget his name. He's 6 foot, 240-pound running back that they would use as like a power complement, and he got hurt. So they ended up kind of going more with Chase Brown. Now Chase Brown's going to Senior Bowl and doing all kinds of stuff. But that's kind of what Illinois has always done. Even, before the Bielema days, like when Reggie was playing, he's a role guy. So he's a guy that you can kind of bring in on maybe first and second down. If you're in a third and short, he can provide a little bit of pass protection. And I think he's really just very, he's a capable receiver, but nothing great. And so he's really just kind of like your classic old school type running back that is really just limited now to a role where, you might play 40% of the snaps, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, and take, 40% of the carries.
Thoughts on that, Evan? Just because, anyway, just continuing that. I could have a question, but thoughts on Reggie going so low?
No, definitely. I mean, Reggie Corbin, again, was one of these guys, that produced big time in the USFL. At the beginning of the show, I was saying a lot of the players that the XFL's pulled out of this league, they're not just the afterthought guys. They were like, they were the stars, essentially. They were the all USFL players, essentially kind of the face of the franchises. And Reggie Corbin, you could say, was one of them. But I totally agree with John. This pick, even though it's low, isn't a fluke. I like Reggie Corbin, but, even though he was a future back, I guess, with the Panthers in the USFL, I think, they had Stevie Scott, right? So they were kind of splitting reps, I think. I don't know if I'm remembering that correctly because there's a lot going on. But yeah, so Reggie Corbin, like John said, he's going to have a reduced role in the XFL, smaller role. And there's nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong. He could still be very productive, very efficient, a lot of touchdowns, great yards per carry. But, the numbers still might not pop out as much as they did in the USFL because he is kind of a one-trick pony, kind of a role player. And, Orlando, just given their situation, their quarterbacks were kind of up in the air about that still. They're still trying to add receiver talent. Good thing John pointed out Eli Rogers because that was another guy on my list, but I think he kind of speaks for himself in terms of what he's done in his career anyway. So Reggie Corbin, I think actually it says he's going to San Antonio. I'm thinking he went to Orlando anyway. No, Reggie Corbin, well, if he's going to San Antonio, I still think that's a pretty good fit. Again, regardless of where he's going, he's not going to have a ton of carries. But yeah, they'll find a role for him. And San Antonio also has Calvin Turner too, that I pointed out in the original draft. So regardless of how much he actually plays, how many snaps he get, I think they'll find a way to use him efficiently and effectively.
You guys were running down some of these, and Max is throwing them out here when we were talking about Darius Clark, Dilworth, BC, Marco Silva, Santos Silva. A lot of these guys were alumni academy guys. I don't know, Evan, we've obviously tracked a lot of the alumni drama here with the XFL. John, I don't know how much you've tracked that, where XFL, and I wanted to just make sure we say it on the podcast. So XFL, they had, if you went through the NFL Alumni Academy, if you graduated, you were due an XFL training camp spot. And so when the first round of the drafts went through here, 2 months ago or whatever, it became very obvious that there was not going to be enough spots for all the guys that were still in the Alumni Academy that hadn't been drafted. Obviously, a good swath of them got picked up yesterday. The XFL put out in the press release yesterday with the supplemental draft, and then Mike Mitchell reported that the XFL, it was going to be 66-man training camp rosters going into training camp. They're going to be expanding those out to accommodate the leftover NFL Alumni Academy guys.
Okay, yeah.
To at least they get it. Now, I don't know if that, to me, that feels kind of like, okay, we're going through the motions here. Like, we're getting you into training camp, and then, we might still cut you here in 2 weeks or whatever, but they are making that effort. John, thoughts on that? And I want to get Evan's thoughts on that, because that was kind of a major drama point here in the last couple of weeks about XFL and this NFL Alumni Academy.
Yeah. So first off, the NFL Alumni Academy, I love the idea, and it gets a lot of guys into the league that normally wouldn't get a chance. And a lot of these guys, they don't end up sticking around. They end up going back to Europe. They end up going back to Japan, whatever, but they take all this experience back with them. Hey, here's how an NFL franchise works. XFL is trying to run very similar to an NFL franchise. So they're going back too. They'll be, hey, I got XFL and NFL. Here's what the XFL did that was good. Here's what it was bad. Here's what the NFL did that was good. Here's what is bad. Here's what's not going to work. So it's really helping these guys get a lot of more experience. And I think it's going to be really good for them. But yeah, no, regardless of whether they make the roster or not, I understand that it is probably just emotions kind of thing. In the day, this is all about being the best team possible. And if they're just not good enough, well, they can go back and they're going to be studs in Europe. They're going to be studs in Japan. They're going to be studs wherever they go back and play. And so I think just the opportunity is worth it for them.
Evan, what do you think about this as a compromise? Because we haven't, we had all the kerfluffle and reports and stuff, haven't had any sort of, hey, this relationship ended, whatever. This is what we came. I thought it was surprising they put this in the press release that came out. Thoughts on this is kind of how we're accommodating that.
Yeah, well, I think that it's great that they expanded the number of spots in training camp for these Alumni Academy guys, because I really did like some of the names that the Alumni Academy pulled. It was a very diverse group. I mean, you had guys that were in national championship contention at a place like Alabama, to someone like Darius Clark, who's at a Division II school, at Newberry, and didn't put up big numbers. But hey, it really goes to show that they're looking around everywhere. And to be honest, I don't know how many of them are going to make it through camp. I hope that a good number, like maybe at least 50% of them would. I mean, I don't know if that's being generous or not. I haven't looked at every single Alumni Academy guy in depth. I don't have the time to do that. But I would hope that, this at least gives, again, someone a chance, right? Clearly, maybe in maybe part of the reason this relationship is kind of, I guess, on the fringe is because, yeah, maybe the guys that they were pulling aren't as talented as the XFL hoped or as we hoped or whatever. I mean, again, like I said, I haven't looked at every single Alumni Academy guy. To be honest, it's kind of hard to keep up with, all the guys that are in the Alumni Academy. Thank God we have someone like Max that can tell me, hey, this guy was here, not here, whatever, right? But yeah, at the end of the day, I think that, there are names here that are worthy of, an XFL roster spot. And hey, if that doesn't pan out for them, well, yeah, like John said, there's Canada, there's a bunch of places in Europe now. And when I mean a bunch, like there's really a lot there. The X League in Japan, I know that there's even places in China. I mean, we're getting really far in depth, and we're getting, kind of further and further away from what people, know and what people are familiar with. But yeah, the whole kind of reason this partnership exists is for opportunity, just like the XFL created a partnership with the Indoor Football League. Now, again, I don't know how successful those partnerships are going to be because we haven't even started training camp or we haven't even started the season yet. So there's a lot of things that I just have to wait and see, see develop, see whatever, right? But at the end of the day, yeah, this partnership, whether it lasts or not, exists for a reason, and I hope that good things come out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, I guess it's the best solution. To me, it always feels, hey, we're guaranteeing you. I always read into that. We're guaranteeing you a training camp spot. And I always thought, so you're going to pay him, 800 for the, for the first week and then cut him or whatever. I mean, I think it's good on XFL. Obviously that's costing more to carry the load, at least getting those guys in. You'd assume, you at least get the first, whenever they do the cutbacks, right? You get a week or two of training campaign and then cut down from that. It's good. It's messy. I think we could have predicted this. I'm glad they're at least acknowledged that. We had a question here, and let me pull it up, and then I got texted about this as well. First pick in the draft, Juwan Bushell-Beatty going first, was on his radar as a guy who could go ahead of a couple of the all USFL guys. John, we'll go to you, and then thoughts from Evan.
No, it doesn't surprise me too much. I mean, the biggest thing here is that everybody is looking at they're looking at who's going to fit their scheme, who's familiar with what they're doing. That's going to be a big part of it. And I would imagine that Juwan Bushell-Beatty just fit better, And so the other thing too is, like, you can be all USFL. That's great. Nobody really cares, when you're evaluating what your awards status looks like. If you were all conference, okay, that's cool. Whatever. If you won the Heisman Trophy, okay, cool, whatever. What have you done lately? And so, it's funny because I'm part of the media and I'm constantly like shitting on the rest of media because that's just what I do. As a person is like, look, I don't like to associate myself with you all because a lot of you all are morons. But just because you're all USFL doesn't mean that you are the best offensive lineman in the league, on tape. And so I think Juwan had a really good season last year. And no, it doesn't surprise me at all. He probably just fit exactly what they wanted.
Well, also, I think that the supplemental draft is such a niche thing of all these teams have so many, some need 8 people, some need 12. We all have a really specific needs. I know a bunch of O-line went first, but like you said, specific scouting in that way. And, Beck sees something or whatever, but the supplemental, it is a weird, because I even remember doing the USFL one and we're like, well, why wasn't this person taken or that person? You go, well, because there just wasn't room in all the teams for all that stuff. Evan, thoughts on that first overall here with the supplemental?
Yeah, well, I think this is just the perfect tie into what we talked about earlier, right? And, how highly offensive line should be valued. It doesn't shock me that in a supplemental draft, you have an offensive lineman going first overall. And I don't really care what he's from or what the accolades are, because at the end of the day, it just comes to, hey, can this guy come on our line and block for us? Yeah, like, again, we talked about, or at least I talked about, the value of like tackles versus guard and center, but that's not really important here in the large scheme of things. At the end of the day, everyone's just looking to immediately get that extra offensive lineman help because those guys are so difficult to find. Generally, you want to get those as early as possible so you feel comfortable. You kind of have that safety blanket, if that makes sense.
And here's another thing to piggyback off of that too, is the fact that when we look at the NFL draft, so much of the NFL draft is dictated by groupthink. And what I mean by groupthink is you got all the scouts talking to each other, you got all the managers talking to each other. All the coaches are talking to each other. Oh, did you see so-and-so? They go to the combine. They go to these all-star events. They're sitting there. Oh, did you see that? Well, they're sitting next to each other, writing notes, talking about guys. They're getting a feel for what everybody else is thinking. When you walk into a supplemental draft like this, you don't have that at all. There's no real going back and forth. It's everybody's focused on their roster. They don't really care what anybody else's board looks like. They're not thinking about value. They're not thinking about, oh, well, we can take this guy here because he'll still be there. You know, this guy's going to still be there in the third round or whatever. That's not part of the conversation that's going on, you know, because they're not going and doing all these events and stuff together. They're not talking to each other constantly. They're focused on their teams. They're in their little zones doing their stuff. So I think that's another part of it too, is and why these supplemental drafts and anything the XFL's done draft wise has been so wild is because you have so many guys, you know, that you have all these teams and they're not doing groupthink. They're not involved in groupthink. And that's a big thing that dictates like the NFL draft.
Leon has a question here. Hey, how many all USFL players were drafted? My note here says 12 all teamers plus 3 midseason. I think that combines both the original draft and the supplemental on that. And then we talked before, a bunch of the O-line and stuff was from that. I have a question. I want to do team breakdowns before we go. I don't want to take this forever here, but I think we can hopefully go a few more minutes and get a couple other notes out. I had on Ryan Cave and Kenneth Farrow here a couple weeks ago. They're the ones that negotiated the USFL CBA, part of the union and all of that. And they talked a lot about this war for arms, right? And we've talked about war for arms and what players going to get talent. John, who won the war for arms here? And then we'll get Evan's thoughts as well.
Are you talking between the XFL and the USFL?
Yeah, between the XFL and the USFL. Yeah, we'll add CFL in another day, but at least right now.
So I'm sorry, guys, and I know that we've got some listeners and everybody that have already been commenting about our XFL bias and whatever, but it's just facts at this point, man. Like the XFL's killed it. They've just done a great job. They got all the players that want to go over there. The only reason that you're really staying in the USFL at this point, and I've talked to the guys that are staying, they've explained this to me too, and it made sense. Is, well, I know that I have a better opportunity here right now. Yeah, I know that I'm going to start. I know that I'm going to play. I know that I'm going to get, I'm going to put reps on tape. And so that's totally understandable, right? You've already built a repertoire with your coach, with your team there. That's totally understandable, and I would totally do that. But no, in terms of the arms race here, oh yeah, no, the XFL's got it.
Evan, thoughts on that? Keep in mind, I haven't commented on this. Your thoughts?
Well, look, the reality is, yeah, I think the XFL has done a better job, but I don't want to discredit the USFL because now that we've had so many of the USFL players, I guess, poached by the XFL, and I am good friends with all the people that run that Hub camp, and Hub is like directly tied with USFL now. I mean, hell, John DiFilippo was coaching there, and he's, also the coach of the Breakers now. So it was all this kind of, perfect tie-in. So at this point, I maybe have seen more USFL players than I have XFL players. Again, I'm not counting, but that's just a ballpark estimate. It's got to be about 50-50 at this point. And again, because the XFL is taking, all these great names, I feel like the USFL is now in a position where even if the players that they get might not be as talented, they're still doing a lot of work to find those players. They're really digging into the depths with their scouting department, which a lot of is through that Hub camp now to find, these guys. And when I look at the Hub rosters, which I have about, however many of them from all the camps that I've gone to, a lot of the guys that they bring in, are Division II, Division III, NAIA. They've got like JUCO stuff now. There's a lot more diversity. And I think that is what kind of separates the XFL and the USFL. What really gave the XFL an advantage, I believe, is those showcases. Me and Reed were at one of them in Arizona. The USFL didn't do that. And, now they have their partnership with Hub, which is great, but it's almost like, you're kind of one step behind the game because the XFL's already taken a lot of your talent. So now you're kind of relying on, these scouts doing the nitty gritty work, at these lower levels of college football to try and get, those players. And, people like me fall into that category. I look at a lot of the small school talent, but at the end of the day, yeah, the XFL kind of established their player development program early through, well, A, the showcases, and B, the partnerships with like the NFL Alumni Academy and the Indoor Football League. Again, all these places, they kind of made that statement early, months before they even kicked off, saying, hey, this is how we're going to do it. These are the types of players that we want to have in our league, and we're going to make this a priority. Where I remember we did the USFL draft show. It's coming up on a year now in February. It'll have been a year already, which is crazy to think about. When I was here doing the USFL draft show, and there were a lot of notable names, good names in that draft, but it almost felt like the USFL didn't entirely stick to their identity, because I specifically remember the league saying, we're going to try and, pick players that are like 25 and under. That's sort of our category. What the XFL just did, taking all these guys that came out in 2020 and 2021, the sort of COVID hindered years. The USFL said that, but they didn't really follow through on it. Their draft did have some guys that I was excited about, younger guys, but they were also picking dudes that were, over 30 and that were kind of, you're kind of asking yourself like, well, you're probably a good player, good dude, but why are we giving you another chance when people like, taking Abram Smith, the first overall pick in the XFL draft this year, who just came out, I think this year or last year, maybe deserves that chance more. So that's, again, a lot of information to take in, but overall, that's where I stand on it. I do think the XFL has an advantage. And I've said that plenty of times before. I still stand by it.
It's just interesting. I mean, and I think people think that like when I book guests or we're having all these conversations, like even when I was doing all the USFL lawsuit stuff, and remember the old USFL was suing the new USFL, and I had it with Michael Cohen would come on, like the trademark lawyer. And I think people really thought like, oh, Reed's finding someone that's like agreeing with his bias. I'm like, I am just thanking my stars that the Beverly Hills IP lawyer has taken 20 minutes out of his time to come on my show. Like, I'm not pre-checking him of like, now you're going to make sure you say that, like, it just, the conversations happen. I think it's interesting. And I will just say this for, the first part of this, and the numbers now with the supplemental will obviously come about. A lot was made. The XFL was going to draft players, and then they weren't going to make them sign until 12/26. You had till 12/26 to opt in. Who was going to go? Pat Ruffino in our group chat today has 4 players that opted to the USFL after getting drafted by the XFL: Rico Gafford, Jesse Lemonier, TJ Green, and then Dexter Williams. So that's 4 players of 308, whatever players that were, drafted, whatever that opted in between getting drafted and whatever to opt to sign to the USFL. So this whole, hey, what's happening? So just, and again, I don't want to weigh one way or another on that, but I just, facts in some regard, and I'll still get, crapped on, but it's just interesting that a lot was made of that. And now ultimately most guys are still, opting one or the other, even with the CBA, even with the increased payment, even with the negotiations and all of that stuff. John, any reactions to that?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, the situation here's better. We've talked about this before, right? If you're in the XFL, the calendar's better. It just is. If you're trying to go to the NFL, you want to make a run at having a career there. You're going here to basically get some tape and develop, hopefully, if all things go well. The XFL, the calendar's set up better, right? So the season starts a week after the Super Bowl. It's going to end, right as teams are starting mini camps, which is huge, right? Because mini camp, that's when you start running your offensive install, your installs on defense, your basic, hey, this is what we're going to do this year. Here's what we're planning. All that's set up. You get involved in that. You make a roster. You stick around for training camp. You got a way better shot at making it than guys that are coming in from the USFL, because USFL ends in July, right? And so now you're jumping in as training camp starting. You're 2 months behind these other guys that, have not been playing and that are just been working out and staying in shape and all that stuff. You've been beat up, having a physical year, and they're 2 months ahead of you in terms of what they understand about the install. So that's huge. I can't speak about how big that is. And I think that's really why we didn't see a lot of USFL guys stick around in the NFL this year, is because they all came in late. And they, like literally 3 weeks before the first preseason game, just as training camps were getting started, they all came in late. It didn't set them up for success. So if you're trying to go to the NFL, the USFL is perfect for you. If you're not going to make the NFL and you've accepted that at this point, that your chances are slim to none, the USFL is a great spot for you to go, because you can settle in there. You can play your season. You're going to get standalone television time. In terms of football, there's not going to be anything else on. And it's good. It's a good time frame.
Evan, was it in our group chat today that I can't remember if it was you or Sam, someone had mentioned, playing in front of crowds as part of it, which is still interesting to me for opting to go to the XFL versus the USFL, one of the players, which is interesting because, that presumably USFL is going to be in 3 hubs this year, right? I mean, there is going to be a lot more, crowd, whatever with that. Any other thoughts on that? And then I want to round this out with kind of training camp previews before we go.
Right. Well, I think, in terms of, I guess like crowd versus no crowd or the hub format, that has to do a lot more with the fans and the fan experience and your overall, engagement with the public. Because, like from a player's perspective, I think it's more about where can I play and, where can I maybe make the most money, right? That's what it comes down to. And like John said, I think the USFL is great for players who are like, yeah, you know what? Like I'm probably not going to be in the NFL. I've accepted that, but I still want to play pro football for a couple years and, make some money before I eventually, go and do whatever, after football. But with the XFL, I think because they focus so much more on player development, I'm not saying that there won't be players in the XFL who stay there for many years, but there's a higher chance that I guess NFL teams will look at, the XFL teams and be like, hey, we like this guy, we like what he has, we want to bring him into camp. I think like the XFL has positioned themselves more to have that happen than the USFL has. And look, it showed even between 2020 and then the USFL this year, because if you go back, 3 years, the NFL pulled a lot of guys out from the XFL, the original, 2.0, whatever we're calling it. And then you look at, the USFL, really there was only one guy, KaVontae Turpin. And yes, he made the Pro Bowl as a specialist, good for him. I love KaVontae Turpin, amazing story. But it's a sheer contrast, like the USFL, like I think mostly due to time rather than talent. Maybe talent I'm sure played a role in it, but mostly due to that sort of when does the season end? The NFL teams just have a way of evaluating players, and if they, if a player is with a team, halfway through NFL training camp, well then it's just kind of hard, for things to happen. So yeah, I think that's where we ultimately stand on that.
We have a comment here, and I'm messaging. Van wants to. We got 4th Canton Hub. Anything I've ever heard from the Canton Hub does not come from anyone I would deem wildly reliable. That does not mean that there is not a 4th hub. All I've ever heard is 3. We had Ryan Cave and Kenneth Farrawan. They said as much in negotiating the Detroit and trying to figure out if they were going to be at Ford Field or somewhere else there. So there very well may be a 4th hub. I don't know if they're waiting for the TV schedule and all of that to announce, the XFL for the USFL to put that out. Like I said, anything I've ever heard from a 4th hub, I would not deem those sources reliable. So it could still be, but as far as I've heard on that, Evan, have you heard anything else about that? I don't want to dive too down into the fodder here of fan fiction, but any other thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I've heard 3 hubs, and that's kind of the way it seems to be. Again, I've been so busy with the XFL stuff, and yes, you can come at me and say XFL bias, whatever. I don't care. I've just been so focused on that like, where the USFL hubs are going to be and how many of them there are. Well, that doesn't really matter a lot to me. I mean, again, I'm not a huge fan of the hub format, but I do totally understand it for financial reasons. And hey, it worked well for the USFL, so why not expand it a bit, right? I mean, you don't need to have, I guess, from their perspective, every team in their home stadium yet, but it certainly helps, to get more eyes on the product if you're expanding to more destinations across the country and not just Birmingham, Alabama, where, I've talked with, you, Reed, and Andy about that when you guys were over there and how it's not exactly sort of a hub city for sports in a way. So, yeah, again, that's kind of where we're at on that.
Yeah, I don't really reach out to, people message me stuff or whatever. And, like Brian Scott thing, like, I don't want to know, like, I don't reach out and I'm trying to get all the, people come at me and tell me things. I just know what I've heard. I had heard 3 hubs from the same person that told me they were setting up in Memphis, from the same person that told me other things that have come true. So if it works out, if it doesn't, maybe they've changed. Maybe Brian Wood stepped down and now they said, hey, now we're going to go cash crazy here. And we're going to spend, I don't know. I think you have time. You have time. You can negotiate all that. I don't know. They're set up there at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. They have a stadium. I would have put the North Hub there anyway and not dealt with Detroit. But I think it would be an easier swing there. But you certainly wouldn't have any home teams at this point unless we're relocating someone else. Before we go, John, like training camp previews where players are reporting here. The first practices are happening the 14th per Von Hutchins. They're going to do a lot of paperwork and medicals, kind of all that stuff. Like teams we're looking forward to, teams we're kind of scared of. Obviously, we'll get Evan's thoughts as well. But top 2 and bottom 2 teams we're kind of like thinking about.
Okay, top 2. All right, this is really cliche, because we've only mentioned his name 10 times on the broadcast, and he may be watching. But the Vegas Vipers, Brian Scott. This is a team that got a lot of interesting guys. Martavis Bryant's there, Jeff Badette's there. Those are guys that have done really well at these lower levels. Run attack looks interesting. Matt Jones, John Lovett. John Lovett's a really good running back, by the way, out of Penn State, if I'm remembering correctly. And so you've got a decent offensive line there too. Vic Beasley's on this team. There's a couple other guys kind of pop. Max Roberts, Boston College guy, kind of a linebacker, defensive end hybrid. Probably end up playing like a, what's the word? The Eagles 5-man front, Hassan Reddick type role. So I like what they look like right now. Like they are very interesting. They've got a very nice setup with the way they built their roster. They are going to be Donovan West is another good guy. He was at the Shrine Bowl last year that they picked up as well. So their offensive line is going to be pretty solid. Might be the best offensive line that Brian's ever played with, to be honest. And on the other side of things, honestly, as crazy as it might sound, I really like Arlington. I mean, I think that the quarterbacks are all about the same, so there's going to be a lot of consistency there in terms of the level that they'll play at, between Kyle Sloter, Drew Plitt, Kevin Anderson, adding Devion Smith, hopefully no Pizzagate. Fingers crossed. This is in the XFL.
I saw tweets about that yesterday. I saw that, and I was here for it. I'm here for that. Like, hey,
I definitely said something too. I was like, hey, we're not going to have a pizza fiasco this time, right? Like this, we're going to leave that in the USFL. But yeah, Sal Cannell is there. I literally like Jordan Smallwood as a receiver. Ja'Cory Sullivan is a really interesting receiver as well. They've picked up some decent offensive linemen. They look really awesome on the defensive side too. There's a bunch of guys. Isaiah Graham Mobley. I think that's another Boston College kid, if I'm remembering correctly. I liked him. Marquette King can flip, the field position if your offense isn't doing great. So I was at the Music City Bowl on Saturday, right? And I know that there were much better games going on Saturday, but that's the one that's close to me. So I always try to go to the Music City Bowl. I love going to Nashville. They do a really good job running that event. But the thing that was interesting in that game was you had Kentucky playing Iowa, and their offenses were both very what's the word I'm looking for? We're not impressive at all, to say the least. It was very slow. But the real game changer for Iowa in that game was their punter. He's a junior. He's probably going to the NFL. I think I saw somebody had him as like the number one punter next year. It was a difference maker. He had a good 10, 15 yards extra on every kick. He was pitting them back. They won the field position the entire game. Didn't matter what happened. That's what Marquette King can do for Arlington. If their offense is struggling, it'll put them in positions to succeed. So I think Arlington and Vegas are the two teams to kind of keep an eye on here.
We sit here, we're talking anyone but Orlando could win this. Yeah, we're really down on Orlando. Evan, thoughts? Am I excited? Can I wear my Sea Dragons hat proudly here come February? What do you make of all these training camps?
Yeah, well, I think, in terms of teams that look the best, I mean, I'm obviously biased and I would say Houston's the best, but other teams that look interesting, I guess, are, St. Louis and San Antonio stand out to me mostly because of coaching. You have Hines Ward and Anthony Beck, two first-time head coaches, and I like what San Antonio did because it seems like they know what they want already. Like they have a very specific, and I'm not saying other teams don't have that. I mean, like Houston, like they have, again, like a very sort of specific set of players. And, they're going to use them in different ways. I don't think we're limited to one thing here. But I look at a team like, again, San Antonio, where it's like, okay, Hines Ward, first-time head coach, he kind of has this from a player perspective. And it's the same in St. Louis with Anthony Beck. I think their draft was a bit more diverse, but I mean, hell, you want to talk about culture. Anthony Beck's your guy, walks around with a big smile on his face. I mean, this guy, even as a coach and not necessarily a president or a GM, I mean, he's like the face of this league. At least that's the way I look at it. Like, this is going to be the guy that we all know and love and remember, for years to come. And again, I'm not saying that won't happen with any other coaches, but like I've talked to Beck one-on-one, amazing guy. And I've known him, I guess, through Twitter for some time now, long before it was even announced he was going to be an XFL coach. But other teams I'm looking at, John brought up the Vipers. To me, they're kind of a wild card. They took a lot of chances on guys, that like Vic Beasley, Martavis Bryant, big names, but do they really still have gas left in the tank? Well, we'll see. If they do, yeah, I think they could win the whole thing. But if they don't, well, they might fall flat. And again, a lot of that depends on the quarterback situation, because what's really going to be interesting to follow for every team is kind of the quarterback battles, because I feel like every team has one, whether, some guys are projected to start. We like some guys more than other guys, but, there are going to be plenty of competitions to look at here. And, as much as I want to say, oh, well, there's a clear winner for this team and, there's not a clear winner for this other team. Well, everything's wide open. We haven't started camp yet. I'm not sitting here looking at film, looking at notes. So again, I can't really tell you that, but I know that, certain things like that could happen, and that could dictate a lot of how these seasons pan out. But trying to think of some others. Yeah, Orlando, again, kind of a wild card. I'm not going to rule them out. Again, like, they have some pieces. It just doesn't really fit for me yet. Maybe they'll find a way to make it work out. Maybe I'll sit here and be surprised. Seattle, I like a lot of good names. Again, I'm a huge June Jones fan, so it'll be fun to watch his team, even though I'm not necessarily a fan of them or covering them. Ben DiNucci, easy guy to pull for, always on social media, kind of like Brian, kind of like one of those guys that's always happy to have a chat with you. Just picked up Josh Gordon. They've got a couple of other pieces. Arlington, I don't know. I haven't looked a lot at Arlington yet. They've got.
You should be. That's Houston's big rival, man.
I know.
Texas Triangle.
I'm trying not to think about it, right? I'm trying not to think about it. But anyway, no, Arlington, I've got more research to do, so I'm not going to talk too much about them. But again, Stoops is a great coach. I think all the coaches in this league, bring something of importance. Bring one thing or another, whether it's good culture or like Wade Phillips, extremely good experience. So things like that, I think, are really going to make a difference. I'm trying to think if I missed anybody.
I'm looking at DC too, like just looking
DC.
at pictures again. Like, DC is going to be interesting because they have so much speed on offense between De'Aaron King and Eric Dungy. Those are that's some mobile type quarterbacks, and then Puka Williams, Reichel Armstead, which is pretty good. Abram Smith, more of a power runner downhill. Brian Herrien, same thing. So they're going to have 1-2 punch at running back. And doesn't matter. I don't know who will end up starting there. I would imagine probably Puka and Abram. And then you look at the receivers, Jazz Ferguson, Simi Cobbs Jr., who, young guy, KD Cannon, Josh Hammond, a lot of young guys, that have some talent. You look even at the tight ends, Ethan Wolf, Briley Moore, Clale Waring, and you're just like, wow. I even like some of the offensive line here. Michael Mietti, great center back at Missouri for a couple of years. Undersized, but very, very good. Markel Utze. I was going to talk about him, but I got sidetracked because I thought I was talking too long about the supplement draft. That's it. That's a fun dude. He was at Arkansas and he bombed his testing this year. Ran a 5.05 40. But when you look at him on tape, he's faster than 5.05. That's obviously a team that's got Francis Bernard too. And you just look at the roster, you're like, ooh, man, this is a lot of speed on offense. A lot of Jaquez Ezzard. I don't know how I missed him. That's a huge that's speed. That could be a problem.
We talked about that in the last draft show too. Yeah, I forgot about him.
Yeah.
Oh, it's going to be exciting. Maybe here, we've had this whole arms race and stuff. When you get some of these cuts and the quarterback battles and stuff, maybe USFL will be just fine here. They'll get. I don't want to say that the leftovers, but there's only so many spots.
It's the leftovers. It is the leftovers. Let's be honest here.
I'm going to get in trouble, John. I'm going to get in trouble. John and Evan, really appreciate it today. I know, this is exciting. I don't know if the supplemental draft is the most exciting to anybody, but it is, this is good here. And I think we're getting ready for training camps. I got to send some emails today trying to figure out show for this week coming up Friday. We'll figure out. I will say there's lots of comments and tweets about certain things we're still waiting for with the XFL. I think you might hear from me again this week. Just throwing that out there. We'll see. I don't want to promise anything, but I think you might be hearing more. So regardless, we will have our regularly scheduled show Friday. I'll figure out what's going on with that and try to get some CFL stuff in the mix. I had Evan, you will like this. I had Victor Quee here set up to come on the show this week, had to travel, Edmonton president and CEO of the Edmonton Elks. So I think it's going to be 2 weeks from now. So we're going to get that. But I have my big Victor Quee return to the Markcast episode here.
Great.
Yeah, we'll do that anyway. Really appreciate it. Anyone else, comments on here? Evan, we'll let you say goodbye. We'll let John say goodbye. Anything else before we get out of here today, Evan?
Don't think so. I mean, I'm just excited for training camp and to see, we've been talking about these players for so long now, or at least going back to November and even before that with kind of just general speculation and the draft pool. And even going back to the showcases. But anyway, I'm just really excited to see, how training camp pans out. And then more importantly, the season, right? This is always something to get excited about. And it's almost emotional for me because I've, back in like 2020, I looked at that league and I kind of thought, hey, that would be fun to, it'd be fun to be a part of that. And now I feel like I really am, and I'm actually working with these people, and it's a really sort of wholesome and fulfilling time, to see this come together, or back together after all this, sort of uncertainty, going, I guess it's been, almost 3 years now, to really look at this and to see how far not only I've come, but like how far we've all come and how far, Reed's show has come. This has provided not just me with a lot of opportunities, but plenty of other people, players, coaches, us in the media. So it's a good time all around. I'll leave it at that.
John, and then I'll close out here. John, anything else?
Go Vegas. Be a big, and honestly, look, I'm gonna get a text from Brian as soon as I say this too. But go San Antonio. Wow. Anthony Russo, baby.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
I will say I was at the XFL 2020 kickoff. I was there, Dragons in DC. I cried like literally during I wept during the countdown because it was like kick down like 2 minutes or whatever. I had like day drunk mimosas for 2 hours before then, so that might have had something to do with it. I was very emotional. I don't think I'm going to be emotional this time. I think we've had a lot more stuff that we've dealt with here in the last couple of years. Getting ready for this. I'm in a different space now, but as a fan, back in 2020, I did weep openly, and I hope fans will cry again here getting ready for this kickoff. I don't know if I will be part of that just because I'm so grizzled and like angry now, and I'm just so biased, and I just have such hate and bias in my heart. But really appreciate it. Like I said, like and subscribe. We've added a bunch of new people here. Brian asks me about this all the time. We hit 2,500. We're slowly getting up there, creeping up. Doesn't cost you anything. John, you've seen this, right? You get your very own Brian Scott autographed Spring League football. And then I have like 12 Spring League jerseys. I have to get away. They're literally sitting in the pile in the corner of my office. So, we got to get there. 2,500, like and subscribe. Thank you guys all so much, Evan, XFL News Hub, and John here. I really appreciate it. And John was like, I reached out to John. I said, hey, John, the supplemental draft is going to be the state. He's like, but do you need a guest?
Yes, well, no, because that was the first time that you ever reached out to me about coming on the show.
Oh yeah, you didn't think I wanted you on. You thought it was anyone else.
I didn't know what so I get a text. So I'm doing an XFL draft show on something blah blah blah, and I was like, do you need suggestions for people to bring on? Like, and I was like, are you looking for suggestions? And you're like, no. Can you do it? And I'm like, oh yeah, sure, okay.
Yes. So no,
I was John, like, what is going on here?
Yeah, we want John, we want Evan. I appreciate you hopping on as well. Thank you guys again. Like and subscribe. We'll play this and get out. You still get the old Markcast music on the live streams. That's a little Easter egg. I've paid the tremendous licensing fees now for this music through the end of the year, and then we'll have to. I think I get it through July. It's not the calendar year. I think it's like the whatever that I've paid for, but I will certainly use it as my Easter eggs until we get out of here. Thank you guys so much again. We'll see you next time.